stopping in, everybody. Welcome back to Coding with Trey. On today's episode, we are going to create a Kotlin multi-platform mobile project using the built-in Android Studio template. And we're going to start from there. We're going to go over some of the anatomy, the nuts and bolts of a Kotlin multi-platform mobile project. I'm going to walk through the directory structure, kind of go over what portions of the code can be shared, what portions can't be shared. We'll go into some detailed explanation of some more Kotlin multi-platform mobile aspects. If you didn't get a chance to check out the last video, the What is KMM video, definitely go check that out before you watch this video. There's a lot of baseline knowledge and baseline understanding in that video that you'll probably want to be aware of before you start diving into this. So definitely go and check that out before you watch this video. But today we're going to kind of dive in and really get acclimated to what does Kotlin multi-platform mobile look like from a project perspective in Android Studio and Xcode. And we're going to use the code that we write in this episode, in future episodes, when we really start to build our own little test project. So thank you guys for joining us, and let's get started. All right, so let's get started. So the really nice thing about Kotlin multi-platform mobile is it still is in beta, so that is one of the not nice things about it, but there is a lot of documentation already out there about Kotlin multi-platform mobile. So what I'll do first is I'll share my screen here, and this is on the Kotlin website. So you go to kotlinlang.org/docs, and then there's a lot of information over here. If you see over here on the navigation panel. So what we're really going to do initially here is we're just going to follow a lot of this documentation. And it's really important also to understand before we get started, the most important aspect probably before we get started is in order to write iOS specific code and be able to run ultimately the IDE that we write iOS code in, which is Xcode, in order to do all of that, you have to have a Mac with Mac OS. Now you can have the Mac with the Intel chip, or you can have the Mac with the Apple Silicon chip. But it is necessary to have that because iOS is Apple's proprietary operating system. So you need that beforehand. So if you don't have that, go ahead and go out and shell out some money for a Mac. And once you've got the appropriate hardware, now we need to install the necessary tools. And as I kind of mentioned in the intro video, we're going to be starting with Android Studio because that's where we write our Android code. It's also where we're going to write our Kotlin shared code. So we're going to use Android Studio for that. And we're going to use Xcode for the iOS code. So Android Studio and Xcode are the two IDEs that you'll need for these tutorial videos. You're also going to need to make sure that you have Java installed. So if you're not sure about that, you can go ahead and run this Java-version from your command line. And if you do have Java installed, you'll get a version returned when you run that command. And the other thing you're going to need to do in Android Studio is you're going to need to install two different plugins. The first one is the Kotlin multi-platform mobile plugin, and it's got the instructions here on how to do that. The other one is the actual Kotlin plugin. Now, this should actually be included in your Android Studio install, but it's really important to understand that you need to update it to the latest version prior to getting started, just for compatibility concerns. So those are some key things you need to take care of really before we get started. So if you haven't already, go ahead and get those taken care of. and then we will continue on into the next section. All right, so now that we have a lot of those dependencies installed, next what we'll do is kind of dive into the creation of a KMM project in Android Studio, and I'm going to walk you through kind of the 3 modules is what I'll refer to them as. 2 of them are modules, 1 of them is just a folder directory, and I'll kind of go over that in a minute. But we'll kind of go through each of those individually, and I will kind of show you, what each of them is used for and how to open each of them, because some of them you can view in Android Studio and some of them you have to view in Xcode. So what I'll do right now is I'll go ahead and share my screen here, and what I'm going to do first is I'm actually going to close out this project because this isn't going to be the one that we use. Let me restart Android Studio here. I'm restarting, and here we go. So this is what you get when you first launch Android Studio. We're going to go down here to New Project. And again, this is kind of going to be the telltale sign whether you've installed the KMM plugin correctly, because if you have, under Phone and Tablet, if you scroll all the way down, you'll see this option here for Kotlin Multi-Platform app. So that's the option we're going to choose. We'll click Next. I'm going to call this KMM Tutorial Project. And if you don't already, create a source directory somewhere on your machine where you know where this project is going to be. And actually, it looks like I was messing around earlier, and I already had one that was named that. So let me go ahead and delete that. Get rid of that. And let me go back and just clear it out. All right. So we'll click Next. And this screen gives you some customization on, maybe you might want to name these modules something different. I usually just keep it the same, whatever Android Studio suggests, because what's happening here is this first directory, this Android application name, is what we would commonly know in just a regular Android project as the app module. So everything every piece of Android code goes within this app module. Likewise, the iOS app in a Kotlin multi-platform mobile project, the iOS app folder is where all of the iOS code is going to go. So that's why it's called iOS app. And then, surprise, the shared module is where all of the Kotlin code that's going to be shared between the iOS app and the Android app will go. So we'll keep those default names. You can add sample tests here for the shared module if you want. Initially, I'm not going to add this, even though later on, once we get to our, into more of our tutorial project, we'll mess around with some tests. But the iOS framework, I'm just going to leave it as the default CocoaPods. Initially, you might actually have to go install CocoaPods as an additional dependency. I've already got that on my machine, but if you need to, I'll link a page in the description that'll show you. You can use Homebrew or any other package manager to install CocoaPods. So not super difficult and not something I really want to include in this video. But so we'll leave all those defaults. We'll click Finish. And once we do, it's going to scan some files to the index. It's going to do some Gradle builds. It's going to pull everything from that default Gradle file and just go ahead and create a project out of it. So we'll hang out for a second and let that finish. And what you'll see when this, when this finishes is we're going to have several modules over here on the left, and we might even actually want to change the view for how we're seeing this project. So Looks like the Gradle sync finished successfully. You see over here, we've got the 2 modules that we know of, or that Android Studio knows of, which is the Android app module, which is where all of our Android code is going to go, and then the shared module, which is where all of the shared Kotlin code between iOS and Android is going to go. So you might be wondering, we created an iOS app module in the previous step, so where is that folder showing up? And so for KMM projects, it is probably necessary from our perspective to go in here and change the view to this project view instead of looking at Android, at least for the moment while I'm explaining to you kind of what these modules are and where they show up. So we'll change to this project view. And from here, you get kind of a more broad view of what the directory structure of this project actually looks like. So once we click that, we'll go into this Android app.
Is there something else I can help with?
Nice, Siri. Once we click into that app, you'll see that there's a source directory here. And within the source directory, we go to Java and we've got the main activity. So again, just like any other Android project, you've got main activity and you've got Android manifest. And by default, which is also really nice, Android Studio now creates a Jetpack Compose enabled project. So all the dependencies that you need originally for Jetpack Compose are included. So if we go into our project level Gradle file, which is here, I think, you'll see down here we've got all of our Jetpack Compose dependencies that we need to get this project off the ground. So that's really awesome. So let's build this with our emulator and see what it looks like. So I just clicked that green plus up there. It's going to build this on a Pixel 3 XL using API level 30. And once this finishes, what you're going to see is it just says hello Android 30, because all this greeting function's doing is just returning the API level of the operating system that this is running on. So it's Android 30. So good deal there. Now, the question you're probably asking yourself at this point, where is this greeting function coming from? And without getting too into the details right now, we'll get into it shortly, but without getting too into the details, this is coming from the shared module. So, next question you might be asking yourself is, what does this look like on iOS? So what we'll do real quick is we will open this up in Xcode, because again, what we talked about in the last video is that in order to work on a Kotlin multi-platform mobile project and in order to write iOS code, you need a Mac, and you need a Mac that has Xcode installed. So let me go ahead and open up, not Visual Studio Code, let me open up Xcode and pull it over here. And for now, I'm just gonna kill Android Studio. There's no reason for us to have that up right now. So what we'll do is we'll go to open a project or a file and go into that directory that we created our project under. So we go to KMM tutorial project is what we named it. Once you're here, you want to click into this iOS app module. Or if you renamed it something else, you can click into whatever you renamed it. So you click into that, and then now we click open. And now what should happen is Xcode will open. It will start to load. And mine did it really, really quickly, which is awesome. So we've got this iOS app directory over here. So if we open that up, here we can see, again, anyone who might be watching this video with some iOS experience, this looks very similar to what you're already used to looking at. So it's an iOS project. So if we open up our content view Swift file here, you'll see something interesting here too, probably, as it says cannot find greeting in scope. Let me go back. This is actually a bug that I'm going to walk you guys through fixing. So let me kill Xcode real quick. And then let's go up here to iOS app. And once the Gradle finishes, I did that too quickly. All right, Gradle has finished. We've got iOS app selected. Let's click run. Now, the cool thing you can do in Android Studio, and I guess this is a good thing this happened, you can actually build the iOS portion of this app in Android Studio, and it will launch it in an Xcode simulator, which is pretty cool. It eliminates kind of a step if you're in here manipulating some shared code and you don't necessarily want to have to switch back and forth between Xcode and Android Studio. It's really nice. You can launch both types of emulators in Android Studio. So you're getting a little preview here of what happens when you build the iOS app. So it'll tell you the iOS version. But let's exit out of this. I'm just going to switch this back to Android app. We'll kill Android Studio and we'll go back into Xcode. So now it should work when we reload this project. So I'm going to open, it's going to again ask me, what do I want to open in Xcode, and it's that iOS app directory. So I launch it, and then now when it loads, you see we're not getting that error with greeting. Cool. And actually, I'm just going to show the editor only up here because I don't really like that preview window while I'm trying to show you guys this. So once we've opened content view, again, what you're going to see here is you're going to see something very similar to what you just saw in the Android code that we were looking at. We've got greeting.greeting. So the interesting piece of this is you're starting to kind of see the great feature of KMM where you can reuse code from that shared module within iOS and Android. All you have to do is call it from each of those code bases. You've got the Swift UI portion here within the iOS app directory, and then you've got the Android piece, within the Android Studio broader KMM project perspective from Android Studio here. So pretty sweet. So now we've gone over 2 of the 3 modules, and the last one I'll go over is the one that makes this whole thing awesome, and that is the shared module. So I'm going to actually switch back to the Android view here and go into the shared module. And so here you can see a lot of subdirectories and submodules, if you will, within here. You've got all your test directories. You've got all of your common directories. Without getting into each of these specifically, essentially what you have here is every functionality of the shared directory has its own UI testing, its own unit testing, and its own functionality modules. So that's kind of how you see them broken out there. So if we go into common main, this is all of the common code that can be shared between iOS and Android. So greeting was the one that we were just looking at that was by default being shown on the Android and the iOS platforms. And you see here that the class greeting, when you call the greeting function, it returns hello platform name. Now, the cool thing here is we're having some reuse happening within the common directory as well. You'll see here platform is actually getting the platform between iOS and Android, which is kind of cool. So one function's doing two different things essentially, because the platform is different on both Android and iOS. So pretty cool there. We'll go into the platform here, and here you can see get platform just returns whatever the platform is. And don't want to get into the verbiage too much here. You'll see certain keywords like expect and actual and those sorts of things within the Kotlin shared directory and shared module. Those are interchangeable terms, and that's how I use them. But you'll see a lot of that. We'll get into that in some later videos. But all you need to know right now is essentially those keywords are something that Kotlin Multi-Platform Mobile uses in order to determine which functions should be implemented across the board in both Android and iOS, and how those should be expected and how they should be implemented. So pretty cool there. Again, hopefully this was a good initial exposure to what this project kind of looks like when you create it from the default template. You start to dig through it a little bit. In the later videos, what we're going to start looking at is manipulating this code, adding in some frameworks, figuring out what types of code can go at what layer in the shared module, what can be shared, what can't be shared. Those are all great questions, all questions that need to be answered and understood in order to completely get the most out of what Kotlin Multi-Platform Mobile can do for you. So stay tuned for the next video. That's where we'll dig into a lot of the nuts and bolts of the shared directory and how we can leverage that between both our Android and iOS code. So stick around for that. We'll see you again next time.